Fuel cell types. There are 5 major types of fuel cells differentiated from one another by the electrolyte. We have phosphoric acid fuel cell, which is called PAFC, polymer electrolyte membrane fuel cell, PEMF, alkaline fuel cell AFC, molten carbonate fuel cell MCFC, solid oxide fuel cell SOFC. So these are 5 major types of fuel cells which are on the basis of the electrolyte used by them. This is the description of the major fuel cell types. The electrolyte used in PEMC is the polymer membrane, which comes from its name, polymer electrolyte membrane fuel cell. PAFC, it has an electrolyte which is liquid H3PO4 immobilized, and its name is phosphoric acid fuel cell. So it has liquid phosphoric acid. AFC is your liquid KOH, and MCFC has molten carbonate. SOFC has ceramic. Then you have the charge carrier in the PEMC is your proton. In PAFC is also your proton. AFC is your OH minus ion. Here is your carbonate 2 negative, and here is your the O2 negative ion. This is your, you can see, solid oxide fuel cell. Solid oxide fuel cell. So it has ceramic as its electrolyte. This is your molten carbonate fuel cell. Molten carbonate fuel cell. So it has molten carbonate as its electrolyte. This is your acid fuel cell, right? Alkaline fuel cell, I'm sorry. Alkaline fuel cell, so it has KOH. This is your alkaline fuel cell, so it has KOH. This is PAFC is your phosphoric acid fuel cell. Phosphoric acid fuel cell. This is your polymer electrolyte membrane fuel cell. Polymer electrolyte membrane fuel cell. So from the names, you can remember your electrolytes. Like polymer electron membrane fuel cell has polymer membrane as its electrolyte. The phosphoric acid fuel cell has liquid H3PO4 as its electrolyte. The AFC or the alkaline fuel cell has liquid KOH as its electrolyte. MCFC or molten carbonate has molten carbonate as its electrolyte. Then SOFC, you have solid oxide as your fuel cell, which is your ceramic. The charge carriers in your low temperature fuel cells, they are your protons. In AFC, you have OH minus, and here you have carbonate ion and your oxide ion. Operating temperature, it operates at 80 degrees Celsius. It is a quite low temperature for fuel cells. This operates at 200, this from 60 to 220, this at 650, and this from 600 to 1000 degrees Celsius. Catalyst in all these, it is your platinum. Here it is nickel, and here you have perovskites, which are ceramics. Cell components, they are carbon based for low temperature fuel cells, stainless steel based for high temperature, and ceramic based here. Fuel compatibility, it can take in hydrogen and methanol, hydrogen, hydrogen and your ethane, hydrogen, ethane, and carbon monoxide. Now, while all 5 fuel cell types are based on the same underlying electrochemical principles, they all operate at different temperature regimes, incorporate different materials, and often differ from their fuel tolerance and performance characteristics. Most of the examples which we will study, they are based on polymer electrolyte membrane fuel cell and solid oxide fuel cell. We'll briefly contrast these two fuel cell types. Now, polymer electrolyte membrane fuel cells, they employ a thin polymer membranes as the electrolyte. The membrane looks like it feels like a plastic wrap. The most common polymer electrolyte membrane fuel cell electrolyte is a membrane material called NAFION. It is a very, very important term, which is NAFION, NAFION. Protons are the ionic charge carriers in polymer electrolyte membrane fuel cell. Membrane, as we have already seen, the electrochemical half cell reactions in an H2O2 PEMC are This is your one half cell reaction. This is your second half cell reaction. PEMCs are attractive for many applications because they operate at low temperatures and have a high power density. Now, SOFCs, they employ a thin ceramic membrane as an electrolyte. They have a thin ceramic membrane as an electrolyte. Oxygen ions or O2 minus ions are the ionic charge carriers in a solid oxide fuel cell membrane. The most common SOFC electrolyte is an oxide material which is called yttrium stabilized zirconium. So this names you have to remember of the membranes, electrolyte membranes which are used in an H2O2 SOFC, the electrochemical half cell reactions, these remain the same. To function properly, SOFCs must operate at high temperatures, which is greater than 600 degrees Celsius, and they are attractive for many stationary applications because they are highly effective and fuel flexible. Now, note how changing the mobile charge carrier dramatically changes the fuel cell reaction chemistry. In the polymer electrolyte membrane fuel cell, the half cell reactions are mediated by the movement of protons and the water is produced at the cathode. In the solid oxide fuel cell, the half cell reactions are mediated by the motion of O2 minus ions and water is produced at the anode. How other fuel cell type uses the hydroxide ion or the carbonate ion as charge carriers. These fuel cell types will also exhibit different reaction chemistries, leading to the unique advantages and disadvantages. So in the beginning lectures, we will introduce the basic underlying principles that govern all the fuel cell devices and will be applicable to the PE, MFC, SOFC, or any other fuel cell for that matter. While in the later on chapters, we will discuss the material and technology specific aspect of 5 major fuel cell types, while also delving into the fuel cell system such as stacking, fuel processing, control, and environmental impact. Let us take a quick look at the See here you have hydrogen is breaking into two protons and you have two electrons, and this is a normal reaction which takes place. Then it reacts with the oxygen to produce water. But at high temperatures, this hydrogen and this is your charge carrier, right? So it will produce water at anode. This will produce water at cathode, and this will produce water at anode. So then you have half oxygen and you have two electrons to give your oxygen. This will be again utilized here to create water. So these are your half cell reactions. Now we will study the basic fuel cell operation. The current or the electricity produced by a fuel cell, scales with the size of the reaction area where the reactants, the electrode, and the electrolyte meet. In other words, doubling a fuel cell's area approximately doubles the amount of current produced. Although this trend seems intuitive, the explanation comes from a deeper understanding of the fundamental principles involved in the electrochemical generation of electricity. As we have discussed, the fuel cells produce electricity by converting a primary energy source, which is a fuel, into a flow of electrons. This conversion necessarily involves an energy transfer step where the energy from the fuel source base is passed along the electrons, constituting the electric current. This transfer has a finite rate and must occur at the interface or reaction surface. Thus, the amount of electricity produced scales with the amount of reaction surface area or the interfacial area available for the energy transfer. Larger surface areas translate into the larger currents. To provide large reaction surfaces that maximize surface to volume ratio, fuel cells are usually made into thin planar structures, as shown in this figure. This is your planar structure. So here you have a thin membrane of your electrolyte. This is your electrolyte layer. Here you have your cathode. This is your anode. This is your cathode, and here you have hydrogen, and here you have oxygen. So this is a very simplified planar anode electrolyte cathode structure of a fuel cell. The electrodes are highly porous to further increase the reaction surface area and ensure good gas access. One side of the planar structure is provided with fuel, the anode electrode, while the other side of the provisioned with oxide, the cathode electrode. A thin electrolyte layer spatially separates the fuel and the oxidant, the electrodes, ensures that the two individual half reactions occur in isolation from one another. Compare this planar fuel cell structure with a simple fuel cell discussed earlier. So the discussed earlier structure was like this. We discussed it in the previous video. Here you have anode, cathode. This is your electrolyte, which is a sea of H plus ions. And here you can attach your bulb or anything to complete the circuit. So this is your anode. Here only electrons, like if the electrons are moving this way, the current will be moving this way. So this is your simple fuel cell operation. While the two devices look quite different, noticeably similarities exist between them. So this is a very, very important thing which you need to remember, which is that at anode, oxidation occurs and at cathode, reduction occurs. To understand any discussion of the electrochemistry, because fuel cell basically involves the principles of electrochemistry as well. To understand any discussion of electrochemistry, it is essential to have a clear concept of the term oxidation, reduction, anode, and cathode. Very, very important. Oxidation and reduction. Oxidation refers to the process in which electrons are removed from a species. Electrons are removed. Positive charge, they are getting a positive charge. Electrons are liberated by the reaction. Reduction is when it absorbs or gains an electrons. Electrons are added to the species or they are consumed by the reaction. For example, consider the electrochemical half cell reaction that occurs in a H2O2 fuel cell. Here you have electrons are released and a positive sign is we are having. So this is your oxidation reaction. Here electron is consumed. This is your reduction reaction. So oxidation always occurs at anode and reduction always occurs at cathode. The hydrogen reaction is an oxidation reaction because electrons are being liberated by the reaction. The oxygen reaction is a reduction reaction because electrons are being consumed. Okay, the preceding electrochemical half reactions are therefore known as hydrogen oxidation reduction or hydrogen oxidation reaction, and it is oxygen reduction reaction. Anode and cathode. Anode refers to the electrode where oxidation is taking place. More generally, the anode is any two-port device such as the diode or resistor where where the electrons flow out. Cathode refers to an electrode where reduction is taking place. More generally, the cathode is the electrode where electrons flow in. For a hydrogen oxygen fuel cell, the anode is the electrode where the hydrogen oxidation takes place. The cathode is the electrode where oxygen reduction reaction takes place. Note that the above definitions have nothing to do with the electrode is positive electrode or which electrode is negative electrode. Be careful. Anodes and cathodes can be either positive or negative. Like for a galvanic cell, a cell that produces electricity, like a fuel cell. For a galvanic cell, like a cell that produces electricity, like a galvanic cell, the anode is a negative electrode and the cathode is a positive electrode. For an electrolytic cell, a cell that consumes electricity, anode is the positive electrode and cathode is the negative electrode. Just remember, anode oxidation, cathode reduction. This with this you will always be right. This is very, very important. Anode oxidation, cathode reduction. With this, you will be always be right. But positive, negative, that is different. Like for a galvanic cell, which produces electricity, anode is negative, cathode is positive. But for electrolytic cell, which consumes electricity, anode is positive and your cathode is negative. So this varies, positive, negative varies, but anode for oxidation and cathode for reduction, this is always true. So this is a figure which shows, this figure shows the detailed cross-sectional view of a planar fuel cell. Using this figure as a map, we will now embark on a brief journey through the major steps involved in producing electricity in a fuel cell, sequentially as numbered on the drawing. These steps are as follows. You have reactant delivery or transport into the fuel cell. Then you have the electrochemical reaction, ionic conduction through the electrolyte, and electronic conduction through the external circuit, product removal from the fuel cell. So from here, your fuel enters. This is your flow structure. This is the porous electrode which you have. This is your electrode. This is your electrode. This is your electrolyte. This is your anode, and this is your cathode. From here, air enters, which is the source of oxygen, right? This is your fuel, hydrogen, or any fuel. And this completes your circuit. This is completing your circuit. So now we will briefly go through the steps involved in a fuel cell system, and then as we move on with the lecture series, then we will study each of these steps in detail. So the very first step is your reactant transport. For a fuel cell to produce electricity, it must be continually supplied with fuel and oxidant. This seems a simple task, but it can be quite complicated. When a fuel cell is operated at a high current, its demand for reactants is voracious. If the reactants are not supplied to the fuel quickly enough, the device will starve. Efficient delivery of the reactants is most effectively accomplished by a flow field plates in combination with porous electrode structures. Flow field plates contain many fine channels or grooves to carry the gas flow and distribute it over the surface of the fuel cell. The shape, size, pattern of flow channels can significantly affect the fuel cell of the performance of the fuel cell. Understanding how flow structures and the porous electrode geometries influence the fuel cell performance is an exercise in mass transport, diffusion, and fluid mechanics. The materials aspect of flow structures and the electrodes are equally important. Components are held to stringent materials property constraints that include very specific electrical, thermal, mechanical, and corrosion requirements. The details of the reactant transport and flow field design are covered in the subsequent lectures. Then you have the electrochemical reaction. Once the reactants are delivered to the electrodes, they must undergo electrochemical reaction. The current generated by the fuel cell is directly related to how fast the electrochemical reaction is taking place or how fast it is proceeding. Fast electrochemical reactions result in high current output from the fuel cell. Sluggish reactions result in low current output. Obviously, high current output is desirable. Therefore, catalysts are generally used to increase the speed and efficiency of the electrochemical cell reactions. Fuel cell performance critically depends on choosing the right catalyst and carefully designing the reaction zones. Often, the kinetics of the electrochemical reactions represent a single greatest limitation to the fuel cell performance. So, this also we'll study in detail later. Ionic and electronic conduction. The electrochemical reactions occurring in step 2 either produce or consume ions and electrons. Ions produced at one electrode must be consumed by the other electrode. The same holds true for electrons. To maintain charge balance, these ions and electrodes must therefore be transported from the location where they are generated to the location where they are consumed. For electrons, this transport process is rather easy. As long as an electrically conductive path exists, the electrons will be able to flow from one electrode to another. In a simple fuel cell, for example, a wire provides a path for the electrons between the two electrodes. For ions, however, transport tends to be more difficult. Fundamentally, this is because ions are much larger and more massive than electrons. An electrolyte must be used to provide a pathway for the ions to flow. Many electrolytes, ions move via the hopping mechanism. Compared to the electron transport, this process is far efficient. Therefore, ionic transport can represent a significant resistance loss, reducing fuel cell performance. To combat this effect, the electrolytes in technological fuel cells are made as thin as possible to minimize the distance. Now, over which ionic conduction must occur. The details of ionic conduction are covered in the subsequent lectures. Then you have the product removal, which is the last step. In addition to electricity, all fuel cells will generate at least one product species. The H2O2 fuel cell generates water. Hydrocarbon fuel cell will typically generate water and carbon dioxide. And if these products are not removed from the fuel cell, they will build up over time and eventually strangle the fuel cell, preventing a new fuel and oxidant from being able to react. Fortunately, the act of delivering reactant into the fuel cell often assists the removal of product species out of the fuel cell. The same mass transport, diffusion, and fluid mechanics issues that are important in optimizing reactant delivery can be applied to product removal. Often, product removal is not a significant problem and is frequently overlooked. However, for certain fuel cells, example PEMFC, flooding byproducts water can be a major issue because product removal depends on the same physical principles and processes that govern the reactant transport. So this is a basic overview of how a fuel cell works.